Hello, and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, tales of mishaps, misfortune, and misadventure. Today's episode features a true sea dog in every respect, Mr. Hugo Vihlen, who twice has broken the record for crossing the Atlantic Ocean in the smallest vessel. I'm going to play my entire interview with him in just a moment, but I want to give you a quick summary of his accomplishments to set the stage. Hugo Vihlen was born in 1931 in the rural backcountry settlement of Homestead, Florida. The grandson of Swedish immigrants and the youngest of 7 children, he and his family got by with determination and ingenuity. After serving in the Korean War as a combat pilot with the United States Marines, Hugo began a long career as a pilot for Delta Airlines. In 1968, at age 36, he crossed the Atlantic Ocean from Morocco to Florida in his 6-foot boat called April Fool, breaking the record for crossing in the smallest vessel. 35 years later, in 1993, at age 61, he again made the crossing in his boat, Father's Day, at 5 feet 4 inches long, setting another record. He has also written 2 books about his record-setting voyages, April Fool and Father's Day. Hugo turned 91 years old just 2 days prior to the release of this episode. He was generous enough to drive up from his home in Key Largo to my home in the Tampa Bay area to join me for an interview, and I am so grateful for that. His stories of his journeys are simply amazing and need to be told and retold. I hope you enjoy hearing from Hugo as much as I did. Hugo, thank you so much for being here. It's truly a pleasure.
Glad to be here.
Your record-setting transatlantic crossings are truly amazing accomplishments, especially for someone like myself who's not an experienced sailor. But I think I'd like to start with your background from the beginning and how your family life, your upbringing shaped you. In your book, Father's Day, you describe a rather hard-scrabble childhood down in South Florida. How did those experiences shape you?
Made being by myself for 3 months real easy because everybody said I couldn't do it because I'd go crazy by myself. So being born and raised in the country, my nearest neighbor was a half a mile away, and I was just used to being by myself. I was 5 years younger than my next brother, so and during the war, everybody was gone but my mother and myself. So I was pretty much used to being by myself. So during that, I really became very self-confident. I believed in myself, and I got started. I read a lot, and I was reading about the Japanese boy that sailed across the Pacific Ocean. He was the first one to do it in a small boat. He was 19 years old, Hanichi Hori, and he did it in a 21-foot sailboat. And when I read his book, I decided, that's pretty cool. I think maybe I could do that in the Atlantic Ocean. So that was the start of it. I read a lot, and reading can get you in trouble. I tell you that.
And you were, out of necessity, I imagine, very crafty, and you had to use your ingenuity as a youngster and all the skills that you acquired.
I built a sailboat with my good friend in high school, and that's what got me started, I guess. My family was construction, and I did construction work in after high school, working with my brothers and my dad. And so I got used to hammering the nails and cutting. So my buddy and I asked my daddy if I could have money instead of a classroom ring, if I could have money to build a boat. And he said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. So my buddy and I split it up, and we built a boat out of the Popular Mechanic magazine. We named it the Smoocher. Of course, we never had a girl on the boat, but it was a neat name.
Did you have a passion for sailing as a child?
No, not really. I did a lot of fishing in my young days. And sailing never really interested me. But I read so much. And when I was reading about this Japanese kid I became interested in sailing at that time. I really had no experience to speak of for what I did.
Later on, you attended the University of Florida, my alma mater, as a matter of
Oh,
fact.
yeah.
While you were there is when you joined the military. Is that right?
Yeah. It's strange because when I went to University of Florida, I had never been out of state of Florida. Had my buddies drive me across the straight line to Georgia. So now I'm a two-state person. So I think being out in the woods like that, there was no television, and I was born and raised without running water or electricity. So it gave me more than a desire to travel, and I believe that was all part of my starting at a lust for travel, I guess is the right word, because I was pretty much a hermit before that.
Well, after joining the military, obviously, I mean, you were a Marine and you became a pilot in the Marines. Do you think being, especially a combat pilot, that sense of danger was attractive to you?
I think it made it a lot easier. So you get scared so many times that you become accustomed to it. It's not a big deal, I say. So yeah, you get scared hell scared out of you a lot of time when you're flying, landing on aircraft carriers and so forth. So I think that had a lot to do with it because nothing's. I mean, I just don't get scared that easy. So I mean, the thought of it didn't bother me at all.
Just came to instinctually that as things were happening, you didn't really have time to be afraid.
Yeah, yeah. It's always looking fast. Oh wow, that was close.
And then after the war, you went to work for Delta Airlines as a commercial
Yeah,
pilot, right?
I was about 475 pilot hired by Delta. We were flying DC sixes and sevens at that time, and then later we came into DC eights. And so started out as engineer and then co-pilot, and then I made captain just before my trip, my first voyage.
And I should clarify the war that you were in was the Korean War.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. When you decided in 1968 to do your first transatlantic crossing, the first time you broke the record,
Yeah.
what made you even think of doing that? What inspired you
Well, that was
to
from the book that I read, and I guess my lust for venture and travel made it happen. Sort of. I wasn't deep in money, so we had to go and just sort of hand and mouth build this boat. I had it built professionally in Miami, Coconut Grove. I added my aviation experience into what we call a sponson. The boat is a deep V design, so the pitch pole, I wanted it to instead of flipping over, I wanted to build a little aircraft wing on it. So when it dug into the water, the wing would lift it back up. It's called sponsons. So it's the first design with a sponson like this. It's a high displacement hull boat, and I had also designed two booms, which is never done before. Also, so I got what they call wing and wing, running before the wind, was the basic design of the boat. So. It just you could set it up for automatic pilot by just moving one boom in or one boom out, and pretty much stay within 15, 20 degrees that would wobble back and forth. And to go straight, you'd have to manhandle the tiller, which I did a lot on my first trip.
How did you manage the ballast of that first boat?
Yeah, I had like 250 pounds of lead, a lead ballast in the bottom. That's to keep you from pitch pole and turning upside down. So that's the reason for the ballast. Actually, what happened when I was researching this, looking at Miami Boatyard, I wanted to be the first one to do a small boat across the Atlantic. Well, Bob Mandery did it in a 12.5-foot Tinkerbell. So he did what I would have done. And right after that, Bill Verity did it in an 11-foot boat going across the Atlantic. And I'm thinking, well, why do it in 10 feet? Somebody else is going to so small. So I gave up. And then I was in a Miami Boatyard, and I saw an Optimus Pram, which has 7 feet 11 inches, and it's got a square bow. it's used for teaching young kids how to sail, but it's also an Olympic sailboat races. So I looked down at that. I said, I bet I can cut a couple feet off of that and make a submarine design and go out and set a record that nobody else can touch. And so that was how it got started.
And when you made this decision to go for it, and you told your wife and family, what did they think?
My wife was not happy. I was going to make a third trip. She said, "No way, no." Yeah, she's never been for it, and we weren't wealthy, so she wasn't really set up in case I died or got killed. So we had to do a lot of sweating on that. But yeah, she was very much opposed to it, but she did go along with it.
Well, it is very dangerous, as you know.
And my son was 12 at the time, so that on the last one, I'm sorry, he helped me a lot on my last boat, and but my first one he wasn't born yet. Yeah, the first one was the trade wind route. So I did a lot of research on the weather, hurricanes, and so forth. And there's a chart called pilot charts. Gives you the weather for every square of the ocean. It had Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, the pilot chart. So I researched the pilot chart. I got 12 of them, one for each month, and trying to pick out, make sure I got before hurricane season. So it was right around April. So that's the reason for my first name boat was April Fool. And my wife's boat was Mother's Day. So that was part of the reason for the name of my last boat, which was Father's Day. I figured she got to do what she wanted to do on Mother's Day, so I got to do what I wanted to do on Father's Day. So my last boat was named Father's Day, and that was leaving from Canada to Falmouth, England.
And I've read Father's Day, your second book, that was when you crossed from Canada to England, like you just said. But going back to your first voyage, with that 6-foot boat, what was the most memorable challenge that you recall from that attempt?
Not being fired from my airline job. I had to sort of tell a little lie. I said I had to apply for a 2 months extended travel. Is what I said, because if it's more than 90 days, they have to take you in an airplane and you have to take 3 takeoffs and 3 landings. And that costs the company money. So I couldn't ask for 90 days. So I fudged and said, I need 60 days for extensive travel. I figured, well, if I got killed, it won't matter. If I made it back, they probably would take me again. So that's what happened and that was my biggest worry, was being late to work. So I did a lot of manual steering on that one, going the trade wind route. I only counted one storm on that one, which was had 22-foot waves for about a day and a half. And I could tell the size of the waves because my mast was 10 feet tall. So it's pretty easy to tell when they were twice that size. And the same thing on my last voyage. I went through Hurricane Floyd, which the waves were 1 and 2 stories tall from the hurricane. At that latitude, hurricanes travel real fast. So I just had an afternoon of excitement on my last voyage.
Thinking about that experience of being in a boat that small in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean during a hurricane, for me, and probably for most people, absolutely terrifying.
Well,
and it's just amazing you're speaking of it like it was nothing.
First of all, it's like a submarine. So I'm covered top and bottom. I got a hatch that I can open up. I have a seatbelt inside that I can attach my seatbelt to keep the center of gravity low, so keep me from pitch poling over, which will self-right. So, yeah, there was some scary time. Worst thing for me, you look outside and look at the clouds, and you say, wow, it's going to be so fun. And that was probably the visual part was as much as anything. But I had one wave that spun me around backwards, and I was down below and with my seatbelt on. And I had to make up my mind, do I want to open the hatch and expose myself to the elements or let it go? But I was afraid my mast would get knocked off. So I opened the hatch and hurriedly re-rigged the boat so I'd get straightened up again. But Yeah, the way my boat was designed with the two booms, one left and one right, going before the wind, they were sort of like a weather vane, so it was nice and easy. But when you turn around and go backwards, all that it catches up and it grabs all the air, which made it very easy to flip over. So exciting afternoon.
In your book, you wrote about the completion of your first voyage aboard the April Fool. Quote, "It didn't seem like anyone in their right mind could consider the voyage a success."
Yeah, what happened? I'd crossed the Atlantic Ocean when the water changed colors. So I had crossed the Atlantic, and that's off of south uh, east of Cuba. The water changed colors. I ran into an American submarine there, and so I told the submarine to call the Coast Guard and give them my position. At that time, I could listen to Miami radio with my car radio, and so I could hear that they were out looking for me, and so I told the submarine to call the Coast Guard and give them my position. So they couldn't figure out my speed. They had figured I'd be in Miami in 2 days. Well, actually, like 4 days, because your traveling speed is 1.3 times the square root of the waterline. So mine was about a half a mile an hour. So anyway, after they figured I was going to be there in a couple of days, then I was missing because I had no communication. So the Coast Guard, I found, was located by another cruising boat going to the Bahamas, and told them to radio the Coast Guard where I was. So they thought I was lost, and I knew exactly where I was. I just traveled 4,800 miles, and because they couldn't find me, they thought I was lost. So they actually towed me in, read the orders that signed up by the captain in charge of the Coast Guard, and so really spoiled my trip as far as I was concerned.
But they didn't really give you much choice, did they?
No, they gave me no choice at all. In fact, when I got ready for my second voyage, they confiscated my boat again. They said, "Well, you weren't successful on your first boat," and what could I say? I thought I was successful, but so why would you try it a second time? But that was the Coast Guard.
When did you start thinking about making a second voyage across the Atlantic?
I didn't plan it until after I retired, and when I retired, I figured, I was looking for something to do. I didn't want to go stagnant, and still felt young enough. I was retired at age 60, so that's when I really started planning. It took me a couple of years to plan it again, and of course, the first time when the Coast Guard heard about it, I was going to leave from North Carolina, where the Gulf Stream was just a little ways offshore. I'd have gotten hold of the Gulf Stream, and I would zip right over to London. And when they read about it, they sent me a letter threatening to lock me up, $10,000 fine. I don't know what else. So they were not going to let me leave from that district. They also told me that I could leave if I could get a designer, to verify the boat was safe enough. But nobody would, no surveyor would sign it off. So I decided to just go on up to leave from Kent. I left from Cape Cod initially. I was out 28 miles, and they towed me back in. I figured it was a different Coast Guard district, so they wouldn't bother me. But they so the next thing I knew, I was out about 28 miles, and I saw this airplane circling me, Coast Guard airplane. I thought, oh, I'm in trouble now.
Maybe they had your poster up in the office.
Yeah. So they asked me if I had gotten approval because I had a lawyer to try to get approval, and they asked me if I'd gotten approval from the other district, and I had to tell them no. And so they sent out another boat to tow me in. But I was out. The hardest thing on this boat is basically a raft. Getting offshore is very tough because you have the onshore waves. So that was a real accomplishment to get off, because I got into a northwester windstorm, and I saw these leaves blowing across. And Massachusetts. I said, well, let's leave from here. My son said, I don't think so, but I overruled him. I guess he was right because the Coast Guard said no, no.
After being thwarted in North Carolina and Massachusetts by the Coast Guard, you decided to try leaving from Canada.
Well, first of all, let me go back. My boat was designed at 5 feet 6 inches, and when I got to Canada, my British competitor, he was staring at my boat, and I was somewhere, and I walked up this guy was pretty bummy looking, and looked at my boat, and he said, I asked him what I could do for him. He said, "How do you pronounce? What's your middle initial stand for?" I said, "Well, I'm looking at this guy. I said, how the hell does this guy know my middle initial?" So I explained it was Siegfried. He said, "Oh, I've got a little boat over here you might want to look at." So we went about 30 feet, and I saw his boat. His boat was smaller than my boat. So that was, we both made attempts that year. It took me 5 attempts on this boat last trip. And so when I got back to my last failure, I went back to Homestead and cut 2 more inches off my boat to set the record. So he made it from England to Miami in his boat, and I went from west to east in my boat. So I have the record for the smallest boat to cross the Atlantic Ocean because I cut the 2 inches off, and also the west to east record. He actually has the record from east to west. So Tom was a great guy. Tom McNally from Liverpool. He made like 4 or 5 trips, and each one kept getting smaller and smaller. So when I saw his boat, I went in a panic. I looked down at his boat. Wow, he made it he put his together in his kitchen table, building his, and mine was professionally built. So it was fiberglass over air foam, and so it was very durable, strong boat.
So that encounter you had with Tom McNally in Canada, was that the first time you met him?
Yeah, Tom he was an educated guy. A great guy, and I love Tom. I went to England 3 times to meet him and talk to him, and so we've talked quite a bit. But he's now deceased, so I don't have to worry about him beating my record again. But yeah, that was the first time I met him. He was a scroungy looking guy, long hair, shaved, dirty clothes. And he was a sailor all the way. So I love Tom. He was a great guy.
Did you know what he was up to as far as trying to break your record?
I didn't know anything about Tom. I had read a little thing in the paper, but I didn't believe what I read about his voice. But it was a short thing, and I just didn't think there was any boat smaller than my boat. So I had read his name in a newspaper, but that was the only thing I knew. But when I met him, it was completely different.
And then, after you met him, how was your relationship with him?
Oh, we had a great relationship. We had a couple beers together, and I flew to Liverpool just to see him a couple times. We had a good time together.
Now, you mentioned your son, and he helped you build that second boat.
Yeah, I had
the Father's Day.
He worked a lot on it, did a lot of design, did a lot of research with me. There's a lot of research to something like this. Actually, one of the biggest researches is food, trying to get the most food in the space that you have, and water. I actually didn't have enough water. It ended up costing me 1 kidney, so I've only got 1 kidney now because of not having enough water on my last voyage.
Planning something like that, like you said, the food and water situation, where did you store all of that food for your voyage?
Well, I talked to the University of Miami, to the dietitian department there, and get the most for the smallest amount. So it was, I have, it's like 5 feet wide, 4.5 feet wide. So I got room on both sides, like a foot on each side. I had two panels of food and water stored. Water I put down in the bilge because that was heavier, and so I would pack everything for 7 days in a plastic bag, and when I'd go down below to get my 7 days of supply, and so that's how everything was planned. Working on like 2,000 calories a day.
That must have taken a lot of really precise measurement and figuring out exactly the best place, the most efficient way to pack everything.
All except I insisted on having a gallon of M&Ms. So I ended up counting those out like I'd have 10 or 12 a day, and that was all I was allowed to have. But so I ended up losing 34 pounds on my last voyage, and for not having enough food and water. But I figured on 85 days, and it took me 105 days. So I started having to cut in half day rations and then actually cut my half ration into quarter rations. So, and I still lost 34 pounds. I mean, I looked like an old man when I landed.
Now, you mentioned that second voyage, it took you 6 attempts. On your 6th attempt, you made it past the
Yeah, it took me
the
5
shore?
attempts. To
5
get,
attempts.
Yeah.
And once you got offshore on that last attempt, you headed for England. During that time, you wrote about a lot of challenges, the weather, sleeping, and other kinds of mundane things that somebody like me may not even think about. Something like how did you sleep?
Yeah, a fetal position, curled up. The inside measurements are obviously smaller than the outside. So the inside was 4 feet, about 4.5 feet. So I was in the fetal position, except when the weather was good, I could stand up during the daytime, open the hatch and stand up. But initially started, it was cold. There was an iceberg right off probably a half mile from the marina that I left from. So started out cold, and then to northern latitude, so the whole trip didn't have much sun. I had a solar panel for charging my batteries, but I didn't have enough sunlight to really charge my batteries, and that was the problem with my communication. I was able to talk to a TWA airplane and give him my position. I ran into QE2 twice. He was coming out, once going back in, and he actually hooked me up with my wife on the radio through him, ship to shore. I also got on a French naval vessel, and he hooked me up with, put me through to my wife. And I was pretty much out of it when I called her my wife, and I heard this other voice, and it was my daughter-in-law. I said, "Who is this?" She said, "This is Nancy. Nancy who?" That's how much I was out of it. Yeah, they were a great crew. I left my boat. I put my sea anchor out to hold my boat, and they sent a little rib over to pick me up. I was able to take a shower, and I saw myself in the mirror. I could not believe what I looked like. Then I was only 400 miles from France, and actually, after that, they talked to me. The French fishing vessel, they had a fleet of smaller boats and a head boat. And so after I met that boat, they sent me a big chunk of cheese, a Swiss cheese, must have been like a foot long, and about 4x4. I mean, that was the best tasting Swiss cheese I'd ever had. I was hungry as heck. And so the next day, I saw an airplane circling around, and I thought, he's probably looking for me. So I called him up on my radio. I had that was a Marine VHF that I talked to him on the emergency channel. I called him up and asked him if they were looking for me, and yeah. So I said, "Turn right 30 degrees, and you'll find me." So I had a TV interview 400 miles off of France. Wow. I mean, I didn't know what the heck to tell these people.
Well, people knew what you were doing, and they wanted to find out how it was going.
Yeah, the French fishing fleet, and I ran into them first, and then the French naval vessel next, and then the airplane was the third one around.
At any time during either of your voyages across the Atlantic. Were there ever times when you were legitimately worried about your survival?
No, only the hurricane was my only. I was never really scared. My boat was strong, and it was a submarine design, so and it was very strong. So it's like trying to crush an eggshell. Everybody thought it was a 6-foot boat. It's got to be dangerous. Well, hell, my boat's stronger than a battleship. You can hit it with a hammer, sledgehammer, and you're not going to hurt it. You might chip the paint, but you're not going to break that boat. It's like cracking an eggshell. So being small made it a lot stronger. So, and a submarine design. So, it would take anything.
When you got close to Falmouth, you got on board a fishing trawler.
Yeah.
And there were some tense moments there with the captain.
What happened? I'd already crossed the Atlantic Ocean. When the water changes color, you've crossed the ocean. So as you get more shallow, the water color changes. So when I passed the Bishop Light, which was the outside of Falmouth, when I passed Bishop Light, I had considered myself that I had passed across the ocean. So that time I was looking to be towed in into Falmouth. And I saw this fishing boat. They came over to look at me and try to figure me out. And I told them what was going on. And they said, we're going to go make a run for trapping fish, and we'll come back and pick you up. So they were gone a couple hours, and they decided they couldn't find me. So when they found me again, they said, we need to take you in now. So we talked about a price, and I think it was like 2,500 euro. And when they picked up the boat, lifted it up, and put it on his deck, they realized then they couldn't fish anymore. That they were going to charge. They wanted to charge more money because they could no longer fish with my boat on their deck. So anyway, we finally decided to take me on in and drop me off about a mile from shore, where I go ahead and finished going on in. There were some moments there. In fact, I said, "Why don't you just put me back in the water?" And said, "No, we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and take you in." Yeah, I said, "Put me in. Just drop me off. I'll go back in." At that time, I was about 30 miles from Falmouth.
When you arrived in Falmouth, what were your emotions when you got on shore?
Actually, my wife and my son and daughter-in-law were in a press boat, a photographer's boat. They came out to meet me. And so actually I was bawling my head out with excitement and accomplishment. And I looked awful. I showed I told my wife, pulled my belt buckle out, my belt out, and showed her how much weight I lost. And I had a full beard of 105 days, so I looked pretty scrappy myself. But yeah, I was emotional. With the accomplishment, the Coast Guard, and I was amazed. My son told me later on, my first words out of my mouth was manifestly unsafe. That's the way the Coast Guard had described my boat. I could not believe I said that. My son said, "That's exactly what you said. Your first word, manifestly unsafe like hell."
That seems appropriate.
Yeah.
You mentioned how much that took a toll on you physically and mentally. How long did it take you to recover, do you think, to get back to
I couldn't even walk. When I first got off, my sea legs, I had to get my son to help me up. I had to go upstairs to steps, about 20 steps to go up, and I couldn't walk. My son had to help me up and walk around. My sea legs were just too wobbly and weak. They had atrophied on me, and so it took me about 4 hours, I guess, before I could really get back to Earth and walk around by myself. But probably a couple weeks before I could get my strength and everything back, because I was pretty weak and wiped out mentally and physically. You go to bed exhausted and you wake up tired. So I didn't have any energy to do anything above and beyond what sailing. You're on constant motion. So I was just like I said, went to bed exhausted and woke up tired. So that was my the trip.
How long could you sleep at a time?
What I did, I set an alarm clock for every hour so I could get up and make sure I'm still going in the right direction and make sure there's not a big ship running me down. Well, I started out that way, but at my age, I didn't go back to sleep very good. So I ended up I set the alarm for an hour and a half, and so I could wake up and because it was taking me so much time to go back to sleep. But these big freighters, I got one from one of the big fuel companies was bearing down on me. I had to crank up my motor to get out of his way. They don't even see. I had a flare and everything. Had all the safety equipment fired off. I had another problem with a fishing boat pulling a net behind me and it was like, these things are like a half a mile long. And I was afraid to get stuck into his net. So I was trying to get his attention. This was third week out, and trying to get his attention to him. I called him on the radio, and nobody's they're on autopilot. So there's so many people, captains that really aren't in the cockpit. So finally, I just had to stop and pull my sails in so he could pass in front of me. He never even saw me. You really don't have that much control over where you're going. The wind has a lot to do with you. You can go a little bit left, a little bit right, but it's pretty hard to turn around and go backwards. So you just, to stop, you just got to reef your sails, and that'll pretty much bring you to a stop. You can also use a sea anchor, but we weren't that close that I had to throw the sea anchor out. I just reefed my sail and let him pass in front of me.
Your 1993 record still stands.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of Andrew Bedwell's plans?
I'm emailing him. In fact, I gave him some advice. He was figuring on a shorter trip. I said, you better go on figure for 105 days of food. He said, I actually have extra food. My best advice to him, which he hadn't thought about, is when you got icebergs right off your boat, to wrap his radio, to use a handheld ship-to-ship VHF radio, and it's got batteries in there to wrap the telephone around with clothes to keep them warm, to keep the batteries warm, because cold batteries just don't work very good. So he was glad to get that advice. He said, never thought about that. Yeah, we were emailing. You really got to have some street smarts to do this. You're always making decisions, whether good or bad. And
are you supportive of him? Do you wish him luck?
Oh, I've had my record long enough. Yeah, I said, good luck. I said, when you see the color of the water change, you have the record. So, yeah, I said, yeah, I've had the record. It's over, 60 years?
It's a friendly competition.
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
I thought it would be broken a long time ago. Another guy was going to leave from the Canary Islands and beat my record. But I didn't like that because there was too much ocean on the other side of the Canary Islands. So he's talking about leaving from Europe. So that's fine with me if he leaves. Leaving from Canada and going that way, the same way I did my last voyage. Yeah, I'm all for him. I've had my record long enough. I'm long enough to ready to go wherever I go next.
Well, we'll see if he does it. Tom McNally actually designed the ship
That's
he's using.
His boat. All he did was repaint his boat. And he was saying he redesigned it and did this and that. Well, I had seen his boat. I'd flown over to Liverpool and talked with Tom, and he showed me his boat. It's a beautiful boat. And he's an artist, Tom was, and he had a beautiful paint job. And this guy painted over his paint job. It had a British paint job, and it was absolutely magnificent. And so he just painted it orange or some color. And there's other statements he made that I just don't believe anything he tells me. I told him that also. The other thing I didn't like, he didn't give Tom credit. Nobody knows more about Tom, how to cross the ocean in a small boat than Tom. And he gave Tom no credit at all. So Tom McNally, he was a brilliant guy. And knew all about crossing the Atlantic Ocean.
Earlier, before we started recording, we were chatting, and you mentioned to me that being a Marine was and still is the proudest thing you've ever done. I can totally understand that. We're talking about your accomplishments as a sailor and breaking these records, but really you're a Marine, and that's what you're.
Yeah, I was more proud of being a Marine fighter pilot than actually this record, because this record, really anybody could do it with the hard-headed determination. That's all it took, being hard-headed and determined to do this. Maybe a little bit wacko would help too. The only regret I've ever had on my voyage, my last voyage, was naming my boat. Initially, I was going to name it Pat Pending, because everything you pick up has Pat Pending on the bottom side of it. I thought, man, this guy, if I get Pat Pending to endorse my boat, he'd pay for all my expenses. Well, I'm really not that stupid. I know what Pat Pending stands for, but I thought it would be a neat name to name my boat Pat Pending. So I wished I'd have named it Pat Pending. Naming a boat, especially an international boat, it takes a lot of thought. You don't leave it when you just yell SOS that you're in trouble, you want to give them a name that at the receiving end of it, they know what you're talking about and which boat you are. So you want a clear name that is easily understood and in all languages. So that's you see these names with all these fancy name boats that I can't even look at it and say pronounce it. Well, when you get an SOS with that name, you're in trouble. So it's, you have to give a little thought to an easy name to remember.
If I ever own a boat, I'm going to name it Manifestly Unsafe.
Yeah, that'd be good.
The Coast Guard would love it.
Yeah, that's what the Coast Guard said, manifestly unsafe. You get a surveyor to write it off that says safe, you can go. Well, nobody would want to sign their name to it. So, yeah, manifestly unsafe. Good name.
Among Hugo Vihlen's many other achievements, he's written 2 books, April Fool, or How I Sailed from Casablanca to Florida in a 6-foot boat, and The Stormy Voyage of Father's Day.
I wrote my first book for young kids, young boys, 12, 14 or so. I remember when I was that age, I couldn't find anything that I was really interested in. So I wrote the first one for the young boys. And my last voyage, I wanted some emotion put in because I got the personality of a blackboard. So I hired this young reporter. I paid her $5,000 to put some emotion in my book. So that's how the last one went. They just barely covered the expenses of my trip. My last one cost about $65,000. So yeah, it's not cheap.
These are tremendous stories of adventure, courage, and determination. Lots of planning and research. And for more information about these books and how you can read them, please go on shipwrecksandseadogs.com and click on the show notes. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Hugo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Hugo Vihlen. It was truly an honor to be able to speak with him and hear his stories. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, produced, and edited by me, Rich Napolitano. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried, and you can follow his YouTube channel at Sean Secret, or visit his website at sean.siegfried.se. If you like the show, and I assume you do, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you don't use either of those, jump over to podchaser.com and leave a review there. It costs you nothing and only takes a moment, and it will help other people find the show. Also, you can follow Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at ShipwrecksPod. Please remember to do your part to preserve our world's oceans by reducing the use of plastics. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.